Hello, my little geographers, and welcome back to lesson 6.1.3. One more time, this is lesson for grade 6, unit 1, geographer skills, lesson 3, specifically hemispheres and longitude and latitude. So, we will be continuing lesson 1, or unit 1, which is going to be our geographer skills. We have previously already talked about the compass rose and the cardinal directions. We have defined longitude and latitude. Today's lesson, we are going to go over the major lines of latitude, the hemispheres, and then finding locations using latitude and longitude. So, this is a demonstration of what longitude and latitude is. As we previously mentioned with the compass rose directions, the entire point of geographer skills is to find what you are talking about, especially if we haven't been there before. So as you can see, all of these lines have numbers attached to them. So the idea is that if you were right over here, you would know that this city is in 70 degrees latitude or longitude and 45 degrees latitude. We'll go into that some more later, but the bottom line is this is what we are talking about. So this lesson objective will be that students will be able to locate all 4 hemispheres, including the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, the eastern hemisphere, and the western hemisphere. And then students will be able to identify which line divides the Earth into the correct hemispheres. Students will be able to find locations on maps using longitude as well as latitude. So, we begin with hemispheres. Hemisphere means half of the globe or half of the Earth. It is part of our larger theme of geography, which, as we previously mentioned, this is part of the subunit of hemispheres. Moving on. So, we begin with the equator. The equator is a line that divides the Earth that goes east and west around the Earth. And because it goes east and west, that means it divides the Earth into 2 hemispheres. The northern hemisphere is north of the equator, and the southern hemisphere is south of the equator. Fairly straightforward, but this is what it looks like on a map. So as you can see, the North Pole is divided up here in the northern hemisphere, and then the South Pole is the southernmost point on the southern hemisphere. So the equator, as I previously mentioned, is a line that goes east and west around the globe. So what line would be going north and south? Well, for that we go to the prime meridian. So the prime meridian is the line that goes north and south around the Earth. And because it goes north and south, that means it divides the Earth into the eastern hemisphere and the western hemisphere. Fairly straightforward. So the eastern hemisphere, east of the prime meridian, and the western hemisphere, west of the prime meridian. Fairly straightforward. As you can see from this diagram, the North Pole and the South Pole are actually on the prime meridian. We'll go into that some more in just a little bit. So as you can see here, just by putting these 2 lines on planet Earth, we are able to make everything a lot more clear. So as you can see, North America is entirely in the northern hemisphere. North America is entirely in the western hemisphere. So you know that if you are in any of the other 3 hemispheres, you're in the wrong place. So too with Australia. As you can see, Africa is in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere. Most of it is in the eastern hemisphere, but a pretty big part of it is also in the western hemisphere. So Africa is the only continent that is in both the northern and southern, the eastern and the western hemispheres. Moving on, this is a view of what the planet looks like from the pole. So as you can see, we've got the North Pole right here, that's where Santa lives, and then all around this outer edge, that's the equator. And just like we were saying earlier, the equator cuts Africa right about here, and North America is entirely in the northern hemisphere, as is Europe. And then when you look at it from the South Pole, Once again, you can see Australia in its entirety on the South Pole, whereas you can't see Australia at all from the view from the North Pole, because Australia is entirely in the southern hemisphere. Most of South America is in the southern hemisphere, and a pretty substantial part of Africa is in the southern hemisphere. So, the remainder objectives of the rest of this lesson will be that the students will be able to identify lines of latitude on a map, including the equator, the North Pole, the South Pole, the Antarctic Circle, the Tropic of Cancer, the Arctic Circle, and the Tropic of Capricorn. So students will be able to identify these lines of latitude and longitude on a map, including the prime meridian. We'll go into what exactly that means in just a little bit. But first, lines of latitude. So as we previously mentioned, the main line of latitude will be the equator. And that's the one that runs east and west around the entire planet. Lines of latitude, all of them, run east and west around the entire planet. And these lines are also known as parallels. If you guys remember, parallel means two lines that do not intersect, two lines that do not meet. So that is true for all of these lines of latitude. So each line of latitude varies in size. However, none of them intersect. They are all parallel to each other. So on this map, lines above the equator are northern latitude, and lines below the equator are southern latitude. So if we were going to explain these, we would say that at this point, something on this line would be 30 degrees north. So each of these numbers is a unit of measurement specifically for longitude and latitude. So 30 degrees north, 60 degrees south. So fairly straightforward. If it's south of the equator, it's 40 degrees south. If it's north of the equator, it's 20 degrees north. Fairly straightforward. So we're going to go ahead and do a quick little exercise involving singing with latitude. If you need help remembering which one is latitude, which one is longitude, well, when I was a kid, we used to say latitude is fatitude because latitude gets wider. But that doesn't really help you remember which one is longitude. So we like to think of I'm climbing the ladder of latitude. Latitude, latitude. I'm climbing the ladder of latitude all around the world. So to try to think of this as a ladder of latitudes. And not to be confused with the lines of longitude. Lines of longitude run north and south. These lines of longitude are known as meridians. So you've heard that word meridian before because the one line that runs north and south at 0 degrees is the prime meridian. That's where we get the same term primary. It means the big one, the main one. So the prime meridian is the main meridian. All meridians run north and south, and as these lines move from the prime meridian to the east, then that means that they are called 20 degrees east, 60 degrees east. As they move to the west, 40 degrees west, 60 degrees west. Now, unlike the parallels of the lines of latitude, meridians all intersect. All of them meet at the North Pole and at the South Pole. So, to give you a better visual of this, let's go back to this picture of the globe. So as you can see, all of these circles out here, these are parallels of latitude. They do not meet. Whereas all of these lines here, they all go to the poles. Each one goes to the North Pole or the South Pole. If you need help remembering that, we have another little jingle that we can go with longitude. It's a long, long way from pole to pole, pole to pole, pole to pole. It's a long, long way from pole to pole. So we call those longitudes. Hopefully just a little way for you to help remember the difference between longitude and latitude. Now, as I said, all of the lines of longitude meet up at each of the poles. Therefore, there aren't very different lines of longitude. Whereas the lines of latitude, those have to do with how hot the planet gets. The closer to the equator you get, the hotter it gets. The closer to the poles that you get, the colder it gets. So, the North Pole is the northernmost point on the globe. So that's going to be all the way up here. And like I said, that's where Santa Claus lives. The circle around the North Pole is called the Arctic Circle. Just remember, that's where the Arctic Ocean is. The coldest area of the northern hemisphere is the Arctic Circle with the Arctic Ocean. The hottest area of the northern hemisphere is between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer. So that's going to be the hottest area. It's just this little band right around the middle of the planet called the Tropic of Cancer. Whereas the hottest area in the southern hemisphere is going to be the area between the equator and a line called the Tropic of Capricorn. Once again, it's just going to be this band close to the equator. So the closer to the equator you get, the hotter you get. So you've got this band of hot area called the tropics. And the boundaries, the border of these areas are the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, with the equator right in the middle. And then as you get closer to the South Pole, which, as you guys have already learned, the South Pole is the southernmost part of the globe. As you get closer to the South Pole, the coldest area of the southern hemisphere is the Antarctic Circle. So, just as the Arctic Circle is in the Arctic Ocean, likewise the Antarctic Circle is around Antarctica. Pretty straightforward. So, this is what it would look like more on a map. So as I previously mentioned, you've got the North Pole at the northernmost point on planet Earth, and then this circle around the North Pole is called the Arctic Circle. That's the coldest part of the northern hemisphere. And then, as I previously mentioned, we have the equator, which is the hottest area of planet Earth. That's going to be right around the center, 0 degrees. And then the hottest area in the northern hemisphere is going to be this area between the equator, and then its border is called the Tropic of Cancer. Likewise, the hottest area of the southern hemisphere is going to be this area right here, and its border is the equator, and then the southernmost border is the Tropic of Capricorn. This brings us back down to the Antarctic Circle, which is a circle around Antarctica. This brings us down to the South Pole, all the way at the southernmost point of planet Earth. So that concludes all of our material when it comes to the major lines of longitude and latitude. So as an exit ticket and for your asynchronous work, I would like you guys to go ahead and complete the matching game. That's part of your guided notes. It's just a simple click and drag, select your term and put it next to the definition that is correct. So I'll go into this some more in class. Take care, and I'll see you in the next class.